Well, hello, lovely students. Hope you're enjoying either pre-election day or post-election day off. Today, we're going to be focusing on the light reactions of photosynthesis. And then on Wednesday in class, we're going to be focusing on the Calvin cycle. So, like always, you should probably pause the video to fill in the blanks, and then make sure you annotate your notes so that you have them. And then at the end of the video, you're to answer the guided questions. Okay, so let's begin. So we discussed today, or Monday, that photosynthesis is the process by which plants, bacteria, and algae convert the energy and the light, and they can turn it into food, or in the specific food in this case is glucose. So down here is the summary reaction for photosynthesis, and on the bottom there's a question. It's asking what is oxidized and what is reduced in this reaction. And if you take a look, here is carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide becomes glucose. And if you look at the difference between these, this one is lacking hydrogens. So carbon dioxide is reduced to glucose, and then if you look here, water becomes oxygen, and then water, which loses those hydrogens, is oxidized to oxygen. So that is what is oxidized and reduced in photosynthesis. So in the light reactions, one of the first things that happens is that the chloroplasts split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then the hydrogens and electrons in that water are incorporated to make glucose, or they bond to carbon dioxide to make glucose. If you look at the picture here, so here's carbon dioxide, and if you take a look at the hydrogens that are in water, eventually get to carbon dioxide, and they combine, or they join carbon dioxide to make glucose. Something that you'll also sort of see in this reaction, in this picture, is that the oxygen in water is released by the plant into the air when water is split. So one of the things we're going to see that this happens is that during the light reactions, water is split, and the oxygen that is in part of the water is released, and that's actually what we breathe in, so that we can do cellular respiration, so that oxygen can be the final electron acceptor at the end of the electron transport chain. But the point is that the electrons that are in water eventually end up in glucose at the end of photosynthesis. So as we discussed at the end of class on Monday, photosynthesis consists of two processes: the light reactions, and it's the job of the light reactions to make ATP and NADPH, and we are going to use those in the Calvin cycle to turn CO2 into glucose. But today, or for this lesson, we're going to be focusing on the light reactions, okay, and how the energy of light is going to be used to make ATP and NADPH, which will later be used in the Calvin cycle to finally make glucose. So during the light reactions, which occur in the thylakoid membrane, and to sort of, I wish I could write, or I guess I can draw actually, let me get out my pointer. So if we look at remember we drew a chloroplast on the board, and then inside the chloroplast were those sacs, or sort of like discs, okay? So the light reactions occur in the membranes of these discs, which we call the granular thylakoid membranes. And in the light reactions, the following four things occur, and we're going to see how they occur. So water is split, and then when water is split, oxygen is released, and then ATP is produced, and something called NADPH is formed. NADPH is an electron carrier, very similar to NAD plus in respiration. So this slide here is actually an overview slide of photosynthesis, which we're going to come back to. But right now, we're sort of focusing here on the light reactions, and you sort of see the things that we said. So we're going to use water, we're going to split water, and that's going to release oxygen. And then we're going to make, I lost my pen, we're going to make ATP and NADPH, which are going to go to the Calvin cycle, where they're going to be used to make glucose. But once again, these light reactions, which we're going to look at now, occur in the thylakoid membranes. And we're going to see the process, or the order in which the events occur and how they occur. So the light reactions, or the sort of overarching idea of what the light reaction do, is they take the energy of the sun, or solar energy, okay, and they convert it into the chemical energy of ATP and NADPH. Like, if you remember anything about the light reactions, I'm going to go to the Kelvin cycle. If you remember anything about the light reactions, it's that we're taking the energy of light and we're going to store it in ATP and NADPH. Now, in a little bit of detail, we're going to look at how the chloroplast does this. So it's the main job of the pigment, the green pigment in the chloroplast called chlorophyll, to absorb light. So one of the first things that happens in the light reactions is light is absorbed by chlorophyll. When light or any form of energy hits chlorophyll, electrons, if you remember we learned this in chemistry, electrons jump up to higher energy levels and end up in the excited state. In this process, or when that electron is up there, it's unstable. Now, in the membranes of the thylakoids, there are lots of chlorophyll molecules. So if we take a look at this picture here, light will hit one of them. And this collection of chlorophyll molecules is called a photosystem. And a photosystem is essentially a group of chlorophyll molecules that can absorb light. So what sort of happens is that light, which is called, or a photon, which is another sort of word for light, excites an electron in chlorophyll. And that electron, as excited, is passed to lots of the different chlorophyll molecules in this photosystem, okay, until it gets to the primary electron acceptor. From there, we'll get to pass to other things, which we're about to see, which will eventually will cause the production of ATP and NADPH. But the point of this slide is to realize that there is photosystems, or a collection of chlorophyll molecules, and their job is to absorb light. And when absorbed light, the electrons in chlorophyll get excited, and then they are passed through the various molecules of chlorophyll that are in the photosystem. There are two photosystems in the thylakoid membrane. One is called Photosystem II, and it's composed mostly of chlorophyll A. You don't need to know this anymore. In the previous course, it was important what each photosystem was made of. Now it's not. And then there's another photosystem called Photosystem I, which is composed of chlorophyll B. They absorb slightly different wavelengths better than others. But for our purposes, we only need to know that there are two photosystems that are composed of chlorophyll molecules, one called Photosystem II and one called Photosystem I. Their purpose is the same. They absorb light, and when they absorb light, the electrons in them get excited. So at this point, you should think, okay, so we have these photosystems which are composed of chlorophyll, and their purpose is to absorb light, and when they absorb light, electrons are excited. Now we're going to watch what happens sort of after the electrons are excited. Where do they go? And this is how we're going to eventually make ATP and NADPH. Sort of the path of the electrons is going to allow us to do this. The path of electron flow involves two photosystems, Photosystem I and Photosystem II. You're going to see it's a little bit confusing. Photosystem II actually functions before Photosystem I. And through the process, we're going to make oxygen, actually first, ATP, and NADPH. I am now going to flip over to the smartboard software so that we can I'm going to be able to write on this as we're going, because this is sort of the whole point of today's lesson. Okay. So here right now is the whole point of today's lesson. I think the machine paused for a second, so I might have missed a little bit what I said, so I'm going to repeat myself. So we want to see how electrons that are excited in chlorophyll are used to make ATP and NADPH. So if we take a look here, step one, or the first step that happens, is that light hits photosystem II. Notice it's photosystem II that happens first. Okay, and that, as a result, what happens is that light hits photosystem II and an electron is excited. Okay, and this electron is passed through all these chlorophyll molecules. Remember, it's excited, so it's unstable, until it reaches the primary electron acceptor. Okay, now we have a problem. Is that we just excited and got rid of an electron that was in photosystem II. So what happens to replace that electron, that we just excited, okay, water is split. Okay, and the electrons from water are used to replace that electron, but But when water is split, oxygen is released. Okay, this process of splitting water is called photolysis. Photo meaning light, and lysis means to split. So you're going to split water, and you're going to use the electrons in water to replace the electron that was excited. This electron is now at the primary electron acceptor. Okay, and now this electron is going to be passed down an electron transport chain. And we're going to look at how exactly this happens in the chloroplast compared to the mitochondria on Wednesday. Okay, but this electron transport chain, okay, which is very similar to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, makes ATP. Okay, an electron is passed, and we're going to look at that process tomorrow Wednesday in detail. Okay, until the electrons ends up in photosystem 1. Okay. Now what happens at photosystem 1, same similar process photosystem 2, is light hits an electron in photosystem 1, and it gets excited, and then it's passed through all the chlorophyll molecules, and then once again ends up at another primary electron acceptor. Okay? The electron then travels down another electron transport chain. Okay, but this makes no ATP. It doesn't have an ATP synthase, so it doesn't make any ATP. Okay, and the electron is passed and passed and passed until it ends up in NADP, which makes NADPH. Okay, so we started off with electrons in the chlorophyll, okay, which eventually end up in NADPH. And while moving the electron through all these electron carriers, we made some ATP. These guys, ATP and NADPH, are going to go to the Calvin cycle, where they're going to be used to make glucose. So if we were going to sort of trace the path of electrons, I just went to a blank slide. You can write this wherever. So the electrons start off in Photosystem II. Okay. Then they end up in a primary electron acceptor, and then they travel down an electron transport chain. Okay, and then during the electron transport chain, they make ATP. And that process we're going to look at in detail on Wednesday. Okay, then, as we're going around and I'm sort of running out of room, the electrons end up in Photosystem 2. Photosystem 1, and they're excited by light again. Okay, then they travel down in another electron transport chain, which makes no ATP. And then finally, at the end, the final electron acceptor is NADPH. Or NADP, and then it gains the hydrogen. Now, the problem that we have here is that if we keep on doing this, so this is the path of the electron is traveling through all of this, and eventually ends up in the final electron acceptor, NADPH, and then ATP is going to be used, and those two are going to be used to make glucose in the Calvin cycle. Problem is, if we kept on doing this, we would run out of electrons. So after this sort of occurs, or while this is occurring, we have water. And what we do is we split water into O2 and its electrons. And the electrons are given to the photosystem to replace the electrons that were excited by light. Okay, but through this process, we're taking the energy, and I guess I probably should add light that's excited here, and then also light, which is excited in the photosystem 1 as well. But the point is that we're taking the energy of light, which is absorbed by chlorophyll, okay, and it's being stored in ATP and NADPH, and those molecules will go to the Calvin cycle, where they'll be used along with carbon dioxide to make glucose. So the last and final slide, and I have a minute to say it, shows a sort of an analogy for this process, and I'll go through it one more time. So this guy here represents the light. And he's exciting, so this guy here represents the light, and the electron is being excited. It gets excited and ends up at the primary electron acceptor in photosystem 2. It then gets passed through an electron transport chain, which is used to make ATP. Then it ends up in photosystem 1, and then is excited again by light. Here the electron is excited, and at the end, after a small electron transport chain, which is not shown here, and does not make any ATP, it ends up in NADP, which becomes NADPH when it accepts the electron. What's not shown here, what's really important, is that this electron needs to be replaced. And it's replaced by splitting water and releasing oxygen, and the electrons in water are used to replace the electron that was lost by photosystem 2 when it was excited by light. Go and answer the guided questions now. I shall see you on Wednesday.